I knew buying a house in Pine Valley, New Jersey, would come with its challenges, but I never expected the homeowners association to become my personal nightmare before turning into my greatest source of vindication. My name is Franklin Yates, and I am an electrical engineer who values preparation above all else. That mindset is exactly what saved me and doomed the very people who tried to make my life miserable. It started 3 months after I moved into the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in early March. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked suspiciously similar, with manicured lawns and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to the acceptable height of your grass. I had read through the HOA bylaws before purchasing, noting the restrictions but figuring I could live with most of them. What I did not anticipate was how zealously certain board members would enforce every minor regulation while conveniently ignoring others when it suited them. The trouble began when I installed a whole-house natural gas generator behind my property. New Jersey has its fair share of severe weather, from nor'easters to the occasional hurricane remnants, and I had experienced enough power outages in my previous apartment to know I wanted backup power. As an engineer, I understood the value of redundancy and preparedness. I had contractors install a top-of-the-line Generac unit properly permitted through the township, inspected and certified. The generator sat on a concrete pad behind my house, positioned to meet all local noise ordinances and setback requirements. I even went beyond the minimum requirements, adding extra sound dampening materials and a decorative fence around it to minimize any visual impact on neighbors. Everything was legal, permitted, and done by the book. What I failed to account for was Patricia, the president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA and the most quintessential Karen I have ever encountered. Patricia was a woman in her early 50s with an asymmetrical blonde bob that somehow always looked like she had just demanded to speak to a manager. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a "Live, Laugh, Love" bumper sticker and had made it her personal mission to control every aspect of life in our neighborhood. The first confrontation happened on a Saturday morning in mid-June. I was washing my car in the driveway when Patricia's Lexus pulled up, and she climbed out with a manila folder clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. She wore white capri pants and a coral-colored blouse, her face already twisted into an expression of practiced disapproval. "Mr. Yates, we need to discuss your unauthorized installation," she announced without preamble, not even offering a greeting. I straightened up, setting down my sponge. "I am not sure what you mean. Everything I have installed has been properly permitted through the township." She opened the folder with a theatrical flourish, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws with several sections highlighted in yellow. Section 7, Paragraph 12 clearly states that any permanent structures or installations visible from neighboring properties require prior written approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee. Your generator is clearly visible from the Hendersons' property next door. I had anticipated this. Actually, if you look at Section 7, Paragraph 12, subsection C, it specifically exempts utility equipment required for the normal operation and maintenance of the residence. A backup generator falls under that exemption, which is why I did not need HOA approval, only township permits, which I obtained. Patricia's lips thinned into a tight line, her cheeks flushing slightly. She was not accustomed to being contradicted with actual facts. "The spirit of the rules is clear, Mr. Yates. We maintain certain aesthetic standards in Meadowbrook Heights. That industrial-looking box is an eyesore." "It is behind a decorative fence and barely visible," I countered calmly. And again, It is explicitly exempted from HOA approval requirements under your own bylaws." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to what I assumed she thought was a menacing tone. "I would hate for you to find yourself in violation of other community standards, Mr. Yates. The HOA board takes compliance very seriously. I suggest you submit a formal request for approval, and we can discuss potential screening requirements that would make your installation more acceptable." The threat was clear. If I did not voluntarily submit to her authority on this matter, she would find other ways to make my life difficult. I knew her type well, petty tyrants who craved the small amount of power that came with an HOA board position. But I am not someone who responds well to threats, and I especially do not appreciate being bullied when I have followed every rule to the letter. I appreciate your concern, Patricia, but I am confident in my reading of the bylaws. The generator stays as is. If you feel differently, you are welcome to take it up with the HOA board formally, and I will be happy to present my case, along with my attorney if necessary. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "We will see about that, Mr. Yates. We will certainly see." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her Lexus, peeling out of my driveway with more aggression than was necessary for a residential street. I watched her go, feeling a knot of tension in my stomach. I had made an enemy, but I was not going to back down on this. I had done everything correctly, and I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president bully me into submission. For the next few weeks, things were quiet, and I hoped Patricia had decided to pick her battles elsewhere. I should have known better. In mid-July, I received a formal letter from the HOA demanding that I remove the generator or face daily fines of $100 for non-compliance with community standards. The letter cited the same section I had already debunked, conveniently ignoring the exemption clause. I responded with my own formal letter, drafted with the help of an attorney friend, citing the specific exemption and noting that any fines levied would be legally challenged. I also pointed out that several other homes in the neighborhood had similar utility equipment, including pool equipment, HVAC units, and propane tanks, none of which had required HOA approval. If they wanted to enforce this rule against me, they would need to enforce it uniformly, which would require dozens of homeowners to submit retroactive approval requests. Patricia did not like that response one bit. The fines stopped, but the harassment did not. Suddenly, I was receiving violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My trash cans were visible from the street for 3 hours after pickup, even though I had brought them in as soon as I got home from work. My grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too tall, despite the fact that I mowed every weekend and it measured well within the acceptable range. I received a notice that my house number sign was not the approved style, even though it was identical to half the houses on my street. Each violation came with threatened fines and demands for immediate compliance. Each one I disputed with photographic evidence, measurements, and citations to the actual bylaws. I was spending hours each week dealing with Patricia's petty harassment, documenting everything meticulously, because I knew this could potentially escalate to legal action. The situation reached its peak in early September. Hurricane season was ramping up, and meteorologists were tracking a significant storm system that was projected to move up the East Coast. Tropical Storm Helena had been upgraded to a Category 2 hurricane and was expected to make landfall somewhere in the Carolinas before tracking north. New Jersey was forecast to receive heavy rain and strong winds, with potential flooding in low-lying areas. I spent the week before Helena's expected arrival preparing. I cleared my gutters, secured outdoor furniture, stocked up on non-perishable food and water, and most importantly, I tested my generator to ensure it would work if we lost power. The test run went perfectly. The generator kicked on automatically when I simulated a power failure, seamlessly providing power to my entire house. That test run, which lasted maybe 20 minutes on a Thursday afternoon, brought Patricia to my door within an hour. She was accompanied this time by another HOA board member, a thin, nervous-looking man named Donald Stevens, who seemed deeply uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Mr. Yates, that generator is creating a noise disturbance," Patricia declared the moment I opened the door. "Multiple neighbors have complained about the excessive noise levels." I looked past her at the empty street. "Which neighbors specifically?" "Because I tested the noise level myself, and it measures well below the township's noise ordinance limits. I have the decibel readings documented." "That is irrelevant. The noise is disturbing the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. I am directing you to cease operating that generator immediately." I felt my patience, already worn thin by months of harassment, finally snap. "Patricia, I was testing the generator in preparation for Hurricane Helene. We are likely going to lose power in the next few days, and I am making sure my backup system works properly. That is not only reasonable, it is responsible homeownership. You do not need a generator, Mr. Yates. The rest of us manage just fine during power outages without creating noise disturbances. If you run that generator during the storm, I will have no choice but to contact the police about the noise violation." I stared at her, genuinely incredulous. "You are threatening to call the police because I am preparing for a hurricane. Are you hearing yourself right now?" Donald finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Patricia, maybe we should consider the circumstances. If the power goes out during the storm—" "The rules are the rules, Donald," Patricia cut him off sharply. "We do not make exceptions based on weather. If Mr. Yates runs that generator and disturbs the neighborhood, it is a violation, period." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Let me be very clear. If we lose power during this hurricane, my generator will run. It is designed for exactly this purpose. It is legal, it is permitted, and it meets all noise requirements. If you call the police, they will tell you the same thing. But if that is how you want to spend your time during a hurricane, be my guest." Patricia's face flushed an angry red. "Fine. Do not say I did not warn you, Mr. Yates. Actions have consequences." She turned and marched back down my walkway, Donald trailing behind her with an apologetic glance back at me. I closed the door, my heart pounding with frustration and anger. This had gone beyond petty harassment into genuine absurdity. Who threatened someone over generator use during a hurricane? Hurricane Helene made landfall in South Carolina on Saturday evening and began its trek northward. By Sunday afternoon, the storm had weakened to a tropical storm, but still packed significant punch. Rain began falling in Pine Valley around 3 in the afternoon, steady sheets that quickly overwhelmed storm drains. The wind picked up as evening approached, gusting strong enough to bend trees and send debris skittering across yards. I was monitoring the weather reports and the local power company's outage map when the lights flickered around 7 in the evening. They came back for a moment, flickered again, and then went dark completely. Through my window, I could see the entire neighborhood had gone black. Within seconds, my generator kicked in automatically, exactly as designed. The lights came back on, my refrigerator hummed back to life, and my sump pump continued running to keep my basement dry as the rain intensified. The generator was audible, a steady mechanical hum, but it was not excessively loud, especially with the rain and wind providing substantial background noise. I went about my evening, grateful for the forethought to install the system. I made dinner, watched the weather updates on television, and kept an eye on the storm's progress. Around 9 o'clock, there was a sharp knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers standing on my porch, rain dripping off their uniforms. My stomach dropped. Patricia had actually done it. She had called the police during a hurricane because I was running my generator. I opened the door, and the taller officer, a man in his 40s with a weary expression, spoke first. "Evening, sir. We received a noise complaint about a generator running at this address. Can we speak with you about it?" "Of course, officers. Please come in out of the rain," I said, stepping back to let them enter. They stepped into my foyer, water pooling on the tile beneath them. The second officer, younger and looking distinctly annoyed, glanced around at my lit home, then back at the dark neighborhood visible through the door. "So you have got a generator running?" the older officer asked, pulling out a small notebook. "Yes, officer. I have a permanently installed whole-house natural gas generator. It is fully permitted through the township, and it kicks on automatically during power outages. Given the hurricane, it activated when we lost power about 2 hours ago." The younger officer shook his head slightly. "Sir, I am going to be honest with you. We have got trees down, flooding on multiple roads, and actual emergencies to respond to. Someone called complaining about generator noise during a hurricane power outage. Do you know who made the complaint?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said carefully. "The HOA president, Patricia Hawthorne, has been harassing me about my generator for months. She specifically threatened to call the police if I ran it during the storm." The older officer sighed heavily. "Let me guess, Meadowbrook Heights HOA? We have had issues with them before." "Can I see your permit documentation?" I retrieved my folder with all the generator permits, installation certifications, and inspection reports. The officer reviewed them briefly and handed them back. "Everything is in order here. Is your generator meeting noise ordinance requirements?" "I have decibel measurements from the installation that show it is well within limits. Would you like me to get those as well?" "That would be helpful, yes." I retrieved the documentation while the younger officer spoke into his radio, reporting their status. The older officer reviewed the noise measurements and nodded. "This is all perfectly legal, Mr. Yates. You are well within your rights to run this generator, especially during a power outage caused by a hurricane. We will note in our report that no violation exists." The younger officer added, "For what it is worth, sir, I wish everyone in this neighborhood had your level of preparedness. We would have fewer emergency calls if more people had backup power for their sump pumps and medical equipment." "I appreciate you officers coming out despite the conditions," I said. "I know you have got more important things to deal with tonight." "Part of the job," the older officer said, though his tone suggested he was not pleased about this particular call. "We will have a word with the HOA about filing frivolous complaints during emergency situations. That ties up resources we need for actual emergencies." After they left, I watched through the window as their patrol car pulled away into the stormy night. I felt vindicated but also frustrated that Patricia had actually followed through on her threat, wasting police resources during a legitimate crisis because of her personal vendetta against me. The storm continued through the night, dumping several inches of rain on Pine Valley. The wind howled, and I heard occasional crashes as branches came down around the neighborhood. My generator hummed steadily, keeping my home powered and my basement dry. I fell asleep to the sound of rain hammering against the windows, secure in the knowledge that my preparation had been worthwhile. Monday morning dawned gray and sodden. The rain had decreased to a steady drizzle, but the damage was evident. My street looked like a war zone, with branches and debris scattered everywhere. Several large trees had come down, though fortunately none had hit houses. The power was still out across the entire area, according to the utility company's map. Thousands of customers were without electricity, with estimated restoration times ranging from 24 hours to several days depending on the extent of damage. I ventured outside to survey my property. My yard had some branches down, but nothing major. The real concern was water. The storm had dropped over 6 inches of rain in less than 12 hours, and the ground was completely saturated. Water stood in pools across lawns, and the street had several inches of standing water flowing toward the storm drains, which were clearly overwhelmed. My sump pump had been running steadily all night. I could hear it cycling every few minutes, pumping water out of my basement and away from the foundation. I went downstairs to check, and while there was some dampness, everything was fundamentally dry and under control. The generator had kept everything running perfectly. As I stood in my driveway assessing the cleanup work ahead, my neighbor from across the street, an older man named George Martinez, walked over. George had always been friendly, one of the few neighbors who had not been swayed by Patricia's campaign against me. "Franklin, thank God you have got power," George said, looking exhausted. "My basement has about 4 inches of water in it. The sump pump died when we lost power last night, and I did not have any backup. I have been trying to bail it out with a bucket, but it is a losing battle with the ground this saturated." "I am sorry to hear that, George. Do you have a portable sump pump?" "If you do, you can run an extension cord over here and power it from my generator." His face brightened considerably. "Really? You would not mind? I do have a portable pump in the garage. I just need power to run it." "Of course, bring it over. Let me get you a heavy-duty extension cord." Within 30 minutes, we had George's portable sump pump set up and running, powered by my generator. Water began pumping out of his basement at a steady rate. George was immensely grateful, and I was happy to help. This was exactly why I had installed the generator in the first place, to maintain safety and prevent damage during emergencies. Word apparently spread quickly in the neighborhood. By noon, 3 more neighbors had approached me, asking if they could also run extension cords to power their sump pumps. I agreed, setting up a system where I had multiple heavy-duty cords running to nearby houses. My generator was easily handling the load. It was designed for whole house power and was currently only running a fraction of its capacity. I was helping my neighbor from 2 doors down, a single mother named Rebecca Chen, set up her sump pump when Patricia's Lexus came splashing down the street. She pulled into her driveway 4 houses down from mine, and I could see her staring at the collection of orange extension cords running from my house to several neighbors' homes. Her expression was thunderous. She climbed out of her car and marched directly toward me, her designer boots squelching in the water-logged grass. Rebecca saw her coming and muttered, "Oh great, here comes trouble." "Mr. Yates, what exactly do you think you are doing?" Patricia demanded, gesturing at the extension cords. "Helping my neighbors keep their basements from flooding," I replied calmly. "Since the power is out and their sump pumps are not working, I am letting them run off my generator. Those cords are a safety hazard and a violation of community aesthetic standards. You need to remove them immediately." I stared at her in disbelief. "Patricia, we are in the middle of a natural disaster. People's homes are flooding. Aesthetics are not exactly the priority right now. The rules exist for everyone's safety and property values, regardless of circumstances. I am directing you to remove these cords within the next hour, or the HOA will begin levying fines for each violation." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice sharp with anger. "Are you serious right now? Franklin is helping us protect our homes. My basement had 8 inches of water this morning. Without his help, I would be looking at thousands of dollars in damage." Patricia turned her icy gaze on Rebecca. "Then perhaps you should have been better prepared for the storm, Miss Chen. Mr. Yates's generator is not a community resource, and creating hazards with extension cords across the neighborhood is unacceptable." George had walked over during this exchange, along with 2 other neighbors I was helping, the Hendersons from next door. George spoke up, his normally friendly voice hard with anger. "Patricia, for once in your life, could you just be a decent human being? The man is helping people. There is nothing wrong with what he is doing. I do not expect you to understand the responsibilities of maintaining community standards, George. Now, Mr. Yates, I am quite serious. Remove these cords within the hour or face the consequences." I felt a cold calm settle over me. I had reached my limit with Patricia's nonsense. "No." She blinked, apparently shocked that I had refused her directly. "Excuse me," I said. "No. These cords stay up as long as my neighbors need them. If you want to fine me, go ahead and try. I will see you in court, and I will make sure the judge knows that the HOA was threatening homeowners with fines for helping each other during a natural disaster. I am sure that will look great for you and the board." Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am the HOA president, and I am a homeowner who is tired of your harassment and your petty power games. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual important work to do helping my neighbors. Feel free to go home and write up all the violation notices you want." I turned my back on her, a deliberate dismissal, and returned to helping Rebecca adjust her sump pump setup. Patricia stood there sputtering for a moment before stalking back to her car. She sat in her driveway for several minutes, clearly on her phone, probably calling the other board members to complain about my insubordination. As the day progressed, the community response became clear. The neighbors I was helping were vocal in their support, and word spread about the confrontation. Several people who I barely knew stopped by to thank me and to express their frustration with Patricia's behavior. It became apparent that I was far from the only person who had issues with her heavy-handed approach to the HOA. By evening, the rain had stopped completely, but the power remained out. The utility company had updated their estimates, suggesting that many areas would not have power restored for at least another 48 hours due to the extensive damage to the electrical grid. My generator continued humming along faithfully, and the extension cords remained in place, continuing to power sump pumps for my neighbors. Tuesday morning brought sunshine and the beginning of cleanup efforts. I was outside raking debris when a township code enforcement vehicle pulled up. A tired-looking inspector named Marcus Webb climbed out, tablet in hand. "Good morning. Are you Franklin Yates?" he asked. "I am. What can I help you with?" "I received a complaint about extension cords creating hazards in the neighborhood. Can you show me your setup?" I walked him through the entire system, explaining how I was helping neighbors power their sump pumps from my generator. Marcus took notes, photographed the setup, and checked the specifications on my extension cords. "These are all appropriate gauge for the loads you are running?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I am an electrical engineer. I made sure everything was properly rated and safe before setting this up." He nodded slowly, making more notes. "And your generator is properly permitted. Can I see documentation?" I retrieved my folder once again, and Marcus reviewed everything carefully. After several minutes, he handed it back and sighed. "Mr. Yates, everything here is not only legal but actually represents best practices for emergency power sharing. Whoever filed this complaint wasted my time and township resources. I have got actual safety hazards to inspect after this storm, and instead I am looking at a textbook example of proper temporary emergency power distribution. Let me guess who filed the complaint, I said dryly. I cannot disclose that information, but I can tell you that if I receive another frivolous complaint from the same source, I will be having a conversation with them about misuse of code enforcement resources. He paused, then added, "For what it is worth, this is good work you are doing. We need more people like you in situations like this." After Marcus left, I felt a grim satisfaction. Patricia was striking out repeatedly in her attempts to stop me through official channels, but I also knew that someone that vindictive would not simply give up. I wondered what she would try next. I did not have to wait long to find out. Tuesday afternoon, Patricia sent out a mass email to the entire Meadowbrook Heights community. I was copied on it, as were all residents. The email was titled "Community Standards During Difficult Times" and was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive rhetoric. In the email, Patricia acknowledged the challenges posed by the hurricane and power outage. She then went on to emphasize the importance of maintaining community standards even during emergencies, because those standards protected property values and quality of life for everyone. She noted that some residents had taken it upon themselves to create unsightly and potentially hazardous conditions with extension cords and generators, showing disregard for community aesthetics and the concerns of their neighbors. She encouraged all residents to consider the broader community impact of their actions and to seek HOA approval before undertaking any temporary installations or modifications, even in response to emergencies. The email concluded by announcing an emergency HOA board meeting for Thursday evening to discuss enforcement of community standards during the ongoing power outage, and to address the behavior of residents who refuse to respect HOA authority. I read the email twice, my anger building. She had not named me directly, but it was obvious who she was targeting. What made me angrier was the implication that helping neighbors during an emergency somehow showed disregard for the community. The logic was so twisted that it bordered on Orwellian. The response from other residents was swift and overwhelmingly negative toward Patricia. Within an hour, the neighborhood email chain exploded with replies. George sent a scathing response defending my actions and calling out Patricia for harassment. Rebecca wrote a detailed email describing how my help had saved her thousands in flood damage, and questioning why the HOA president was more concerned with aesthetics than with residents' homes. Even people I had not directly helped chimed in, expressing support and criticizing Patricia's priorities. Donald Stevens, the other board member who had accompanied Patricia to my house, sent a carefully worded email noting that he had reviewed the relevant bylaws and found no prohibition against temporary emergency power sharing between neighbors. He suggested that the board should focus on helping residents recover from the storm rather than enforcing aesthetic standards during a declared state of emergency. Patricia's response was to double down. She sent another email claiming that the board had the authority to enforce standards at their discretion, and that the Thursday meeting would proceed as planned. She also noted that residents who continued to violate community standards would face fines regardless of the circumstances. By Wednesday morning, the power was still out, but the situation had stabilized. The standing water in the streets had mostly drained, though the ground remained saturated. My generator continued running smoothly, and the extension cords remained in place, continuing to protect my neighbors' basements. I had settled into a routine of monitoring the system, checking in with neighbors, and documenting everything that was happening, knowing that this was likely heading toward a formal dispute. Wednesday afternoon brought a new development. I was inside reviewing some work documents on my laptop when I heard shouting outside. I looked through the window and saw Patricia in her driveway, gesturing frantically at her open garage door. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard whom I had only met once or twice, was standing in the garage doorway, shaking his head. I could not hear the specific words, but the body language was clear. Something was wrong at Patricia's house. I briefly considered going over to see if I could help, then decided against it. Given Patricia's attitude toward me, my offer would likely be rejected or turned into another confrontation. About 30 minutes later, George stopped by. He was trying to suppress a grin but not succeeding very well. "Franklin, you are not going to believe this," he said. "Patricia's basement is flooding. Her sump pump has been out since Monday like everyone else's, but apparently she did not realize it until today. Richard just discovered they have about 6 inches of standing water down there." I felt a complex mix of emotions: schadenfreude at Patricia's comeuppance, concern about property damage despite my dislike for her, and curiosity about what would happen next. "That is unfortunate. I hope they can get it pumped out before it causes too much damage." George's grin widened. "Here is the best part. Richard asked her if they should see if you would let them run an extension cord over here to power a pump." Patricia apparently lost her mind, screaming that she would never ask you for help and that they would handle it themselves. "How are they planning to handle it without power?" "No idea." Richard looked pretty defeated. "I think he knows it is a losing battle trying to bail out a flooding basement with buckets when the ground is this saturated." George paused, then added more seriously, "I know she has been terrible to you, but maybe you should offer to help anyway. Be the bigger person." I considered it. Part of me wanted to simply let Patricia reap what she had sown. She had spent months harassing me, called the police on me during a hurricane, and was continuing to threaten me with fines for helping other neighbors. Why should I help someone who had made my life miserable? But another part of me, the part that my parents had raised to do the right thing even when it was difficult, knew that letting someone's house get damaged out of spite was not who I wanted to be. "I will think about it," I told George. "Let me see how the situation develops." Thursday morning, the power company announced that electricity would be restored to our area by Friday evening. The end was in sight, but for now, my generator remained the only source of power on the street. The extension cords were still in place, still protecting my neighbors' basements. Around 10 in the morning, there was a hesitant knock on my door. I opened it to find Richard Hawthorne standing there, looking exhausted and embarrassed. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with graying hair and the defeated posture of someone who had been through an ordeal. "Franklin, I am sorry to bother you," he began, his voice tired. "I know Patricia has been, difficult, but our basement is flooding badly. We have about 8 inches of water now and it is getting deeper. My wife refuses to ask for your help, but I am swallowing my pride here. Is there any way we could run a sump pump off your generator? I can pay you for the electricity. I just need to save our basement before we lose everything down there." I looked at Richard, seeing genuine desperation in his eyes. Whatever Patricia's faults, Richard had never been anything but polite to me on the few occasions we had interacted. He was clearly caught between his wife's pride and the practical need to protect their home. "Richard, you do not need to pay me. I have been helping neighbors for free all week. Let me get you an extension cord and we will set up your pump." The relief on his face was palpable. "Thank you, Franklin. I really appreciate this. I know Patricia has been, challenging. For what it is worth, I have told her she is being unreasonable about the generator situation. She does not always listen to me. I appreciate you saying that. Come on, let's get your pump set up before you get more water damage. We walked over to his house together, Richard carrying one of my heavy-duty extension cords. As we approached, I saw Patricia standing in the garage, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her expression when she saw me was a mixture of fury, humiliation, and barely suppressed panic. "Richard, what is he doing here?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Patricia, he is helping us save the basement. We need power for the sump pump, and Franklin has graciously agreed to let us use his generator." I did not approve this. "We do not need his help. We can handle this ourselves." Richard's patience finally snapped. "With what, Patricia? Buckets?" "We have 8 inches of water down there, and it is still coming in. The water heater is about to be submerged, the furnace is already damaged, and we have got boxes of your mother's things that are getting ruined as we speak. We need help, and Franklin is offering it." "Swallow your damn pride for once." Patricia's face went through several shades of red and white. She looked at me, and I could see the internal struggle playing out. Her pride and vendetta against me warred with the reality of her flooding basement. I decided to make it easier for her, though she certainly did not deserve my consideration. "Look, Patricia, I know we have had our differences, but I am not going to let your house get damaged just because we do not get along. Let me help you set up the pump, and we can go back to disagreeing about HOA politics later." For a moment, I thought she might actually refuse out of pure stubbornness. Then, with visible effort, she gave a single sharp nod and turned away, retreating into the house without a word. It was not a thank you, but it was acceptance. Richard and I went down to their basement, wading through the cold, dirty water. The damage was significant. Their water heater was partially submerged, and the furnace had water lapping at its base. Cardboard boxes floated in the water, their contents ruined. It was a mess, and it was clear that every additional hour of flooding would cause exponentially more damage. We set up their sump pump, a decent quality model that Richard had stored in their garage, and connected it to the extension cord running back to my generator. When we plugged it in and the pump roared to life, beginning to push water out of the basement, Richard actually looked like he might cry from relief. "Thank you, Franklin. Seriously, thank you. I know this is not easy given everything Patricia has put you through." "It is the right thing to do," I said simply. "Let's get as much water out as we can before we have power back." We worked together for the next hour, Richard and I, moving items to higher ground and maximizing the pump's effectiveness. Patricia never came down to the basement, but I occasionally saw her shadow at the top of the stairs. She was watching, but could not bring herself to acknowledge what was happening or to thank me. When the immediate crisis was managed and the water level was dropping steadily, I left Richard to monitor the situation and returned home. I felt tired, emotionally more than physically. It would have been so satisfying to refuse to help Patricia, to throw her own words about rules and consequences back in her face. But I knew that satisfaction would have been hollow and temporary, and I would have regretted letting spite dictate my actions. That evening was the emergency HOA board meeting that Patricia had called. It was held in the community clubhouse, which had gotten generator-powered emergency lighting, but was still without full power. I attended, curious to see how Patricia would handle the meeting given the events of the day. About 30 residents showed up, a high turnout that reflected the community's anger about Patricia's handling of the situation. Patricia sat at the front table with Donald Stevens and the third board member, a woman named Carol Winters, whom I had never met. Patricia looked composed but tense, her usual confidence shaken. Patricia called the meeting to order and began with a prepared statement about the importance of maintaining standards even during challenging times. She had barely gotten 3 sentences in when George stood up and interrupted. "Patricia, with all due respect, this is ridiculous. Franklin Yates has been helping the entire street keep our basements from flooding, using his own generator and his own equipment for free. And you have spent the whole week harassing him and threatening him with fines. Today, your own basement was flooding and he helped you too, despite everything you have put him through. Maybe instead of having a meeting about enforcing rules against him, we should be thanking him." There was a murmur of agreement from the assembled residents. Rebecca stood up next. "I want to formally state that Franklin's actions this week saved me thousands of dollars in flood damage. If the HOA tries to fine him for helping neighbors during an emergency, I will personally pay his fines, and then I will resign from this association and encourage everyone else to do the same." More voices joined in, a chorus of support for me and criticism of Patricia's priorities. Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting, her voice rising to talk over the residents, but it was clear she had lost the room. Donald Stevens, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat loudly. "Patricia, I think we need to acknowledge that the board's approach here has been misguided. Mr. Yates has done nothing wrong. His generator is legal and permitted. His assistance to neighbors during the power outage was admirable and appropriate. I move that we formally thank him for his community service this week and drop any pending or threatened violations related to his generator or the temporary power sharing arrangements." Carol Winters immediately seconded the motion. Patricia looked stunned, betrayed by her own board members. She tried to argue, but Donald called for a vote. He and Carol voted in favor. Patricia, backed into a corner, abstained rather than voting against it. The motion passed. The meeting quickly devolved from there, with multiple residents standing up to voice complaints about Patricia's leadership and demanding changes to how the HOA operated. Several people called for a vote to remove Patricia as president. Others suggested amending the bylaws to limit the board's enforcement authority. Patricia tried to maintain order but had completely lost control. After nearly 2 hours of contentious discussion, Patricia abruptly declared the meeting adjourned and fled the clubhouse, clearly on the verge of tears. Richard, who had attended but stayed quiet in the back, followed her out with an apologetic glance at the remaining residents. Donald and Carol stayed behind to talk with residents, essentially conducting damage control for the HOA. Both of them separately approached me to apologize for Patricia's behavior and to thank me for helping the community. Carol mentioned that there would likely be a formal effort to remove Patricia from the board and asked if I would consider running for a position. I politely declined. I had no interest in HOA politics. I just wanted to be left alone to live in my house in peace. Friday brought the long-awaited power restoration. Utility trucks appeared in the neighborhood around noon, and by early evening, electricity had been restored to our section of Pine Valley. My generator automatically shut off when it detected grid power returning, having run continuously for nearly 5 days. It had performed flawlessly, and I made a note to have it serviced and inspected by professionals as a thank you for its reliability. One by one, I helped my neighbors disconnect their sump pumps and pack up the extension cords. Everyone was effusively grateful, and several people insisted on giving me gift cards or bottles of wine as thank you gifts, though I had not helped anyone expecting compensation. George invited me to a neighborhood barbecue the following weekend, which he was organizing partly as a storm recovery celebration and partly as a thank you event in my honor. Patricia and Richard's sump pump was the last one I disconnected. Richard answered the door and helped me pack up the cord and pump. Patricia was nowhere to be seen. "She is upstairs," Richard said quietly. "She has not come out of the bedroom much since the meeting last night. I think reality is finally setting in about how badly she handled all of this." "I am sorry if I contributed to problems between you two," I said, though I was not sure I actually meant it. Richard shook his head. "This is not on you, Franklin. Patricia has always had a need to control things, and the HOA presidency fed into that. She crossed lines this week, and people are rightfully angry. Some of that is going to fall on our marriage, but that is not your fault. It is hers for not knowing when to back down." He paused, then extended his hand. "Thank you again for everything. You did not have to help us after how my wife treated you. That took character." I shook his hand. "I hope things work out for you both, and I hope the basement damage was not too bad. Could have been a lot worse if you had not helped. Take care, Franklin." The following weeks brought significant changes to Meadowbrook Heights. A petition circulated to remove Patricia from the HOA board, signed by over 60% of the homeowners. Patricia resigned before a formal vote could be held, issuing a terse statement about needing to focus on family matters. Richard, I later learned from George, had insisted she step down or he would consider separating from her. The storm and its aftermath had apparently been the final straw in ongoing marital issues. Donald Stevens was elected as the new HOA president, with Carol Winters continuing as a board member. Their first official act was to formally rescind all violation notices that had been issued to me over the past several months, and to issue a letter of apology on behalf of the association. They also proposed several amendments to the HOA bylaws to limit the board's enforcement discretion, and to create a clearer appeals process for homeowners who disagreed with violation notices. The neighborhood barbecue that George organized turned into a significant event, with over 40 residents attending. Multiple people made speeches thanking me for my help during the storm, and Donald presented me with a plaque on behalf of the community, recognizing my exemplary community service and neighborly assistance during Hurricane Helena. It was embarrassing, but also gratifying to be recognized and appreciated. I also learned that I had not been Patricia's only victim. Several other residents came forward with stories of harassment and petty enforcement actions they had endured under her leadership. One couple had been threatened with fines because their mailbox post was painted slightly the wrong shade of black. Another resident had received violation notices because decorative rocks in his garden were allegedly not the approved style. The stories painted a picture of systemic abuse of authority that had finally been exposed and ended. As summer turned to fall, life in Meadowbrook Heights returned to a more normal rhythm. The HOA under Donald's leadership was far more reasonable and focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. They organized a neighborhood cleanup day to deal with storm debris, established a community emergency preparedness committee, and even put together a directory of residents with generators or other emergency equipment who were willing to help neighbors in future disasters. Patricia and Richard kept to themselves. I would occasionally see them coming or going, but we never spoke beyond polite nods of acknowledgement. According to neighborhood gossip, their marriage was strained but surviving. Patricia had reportedly taken a job outside the home for the first time in years, perhaps finding that she needed purpose beyond controlling the HOA. Several of my neighbors did end up installing their own generators after experiencing the hurricane firsthand. I helped a few of them with the permit process and contractor selection, sharing the lessons I had learned from my own installation. The neighborhood became noticeably better prepared for emergencies, which seemed like a positive outcome from a difficult experience. In December, nearly 3 months after the hurricane, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia, handwritten on plain stationery. The letter was brief and stiff, but it was an apology of sorts. She acknowledged that her behavior toward me had been inappropriate, and that her attempts to enforce HOA rules during the emergency had been misguided. She thanked me for helping with her basement despite our conflicts and wished me well. The letter was not particularly warm or detailed, but it represented a level of self-awareness and accountability that I had not expected from her. I appreciated the gesture, even if our relationship would never be friendly. Looking back on the entire experience, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at the months of harassment I had endured, satisfaction at being vindicated, pride in having helped my community during a crisis, and relief that the situation had resolved without escalating to actual legal action. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and knowing your rights, and about the difference between petty satisfaction and genuine integrity. My generator sat behind my house, silent now, but ready for the next emergency. I made sure it was regularly serviced and tested, maintaining my commitment to preparedness. The decorative fence around it remained, a compromise between function and aesthetics that I had chosen for myself rather than having imposed on me by an overreaching HOA. The storm had passed, the waters had receded, and life had moved on. But the memory of those chaotic days remained vivid, a reminder of both human petness and human resilience. Patricia had called the cops over my generator running during a hurricane, then had to beg me to power her sump pump when her own basement flooded. The irony had not been lost on anyone, least of all Patricia herself. In the end, the story became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Heights, a cautionary tale about the dangers of petty authority and the importance of community over regulations. Donald occasionally referenced it in HOA meetings when discussing the balance between standards and common sense. George loved to retell the story at neighborhood gatherings, always with dramatic embellishments that made me out to be more heroic than I actually felt. For my part, I was just glad to be living in peace, with reasonable neighbors and a functional HOA that focused on actual community needs rather than power trips. I had never set out to become a neighborhood hero or to take down a tyrannical HOA president. I had just wanted to install a generator and be prepared for emergencies. Everything else had flowed from Patricia's inability to let go of control and my refusal to be bullied. The experience had made me more involved in the community, forming genuine friendships with neighbors like George and Rebecca, who had stood up for me during the conflicts. It had also made me more aware of the importance of local governance and how easily it could be corrupted by individuals with the wrong motivations. I attended HOA meetings now, not as a board member but as an engaged resident, making sure that the reforms implemented after Patricia's resignation were maintained and enforced. Winter arrived, bringing cold temperatures and the threat of snow. My generator sat ready, prepared to kick on during any power outage, whether caused by ice storms, blizzards, or simple equipment failures. I had stockpiles of food, water, and emergency supplies, the same preparedness mindset that had served me so well during Hurricane Helena. One evening in early January, nearly 4 months after the hurricane, I was sitting in my living room reading when I heard a familiar sound, the automatic startup of my generator. The power had gone out, probably due to the ice storm that had been forecasted. Within seconds, My lights flickered back on, my furnace continued running, and I barely noticed any interruption to my evening. I looked out the window at the dark neighborhood, houses without power disappearing into the winter night. No one came knocking at my door asking for help this time. Several neighbors had their own generators now, their houses also lit up in the darkness. Those who did not have backup power knew they could call or text me if they needed assistance, and several did, asking to run extension cords for essential equipment or to charge phones and medical devices. The preparedness culture that had emerged from the hurricane had taken root, transforming our neighborhood into a more resilient and connected community. It was not the outcome I had anticipated when I first installed my generator, but it was a good one nonetheless. As I returned to my book, listening to the steady hum of the generator outside and the sound of freezing rain against the windows, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I had faced down a petty tyrant, helped my community through a crisis, and emerged with my integrity intact and my relationship strengthened. The generator had been worth every penny, not just for the power it provided, but for the catalyst it had become for positive change in Meadowbrook Heights. Patricia's attempt to control me through harassment and intimidation had backfired spectacularly, exposing her own failures as a leader and bringing the community together against her overreach. The cops she had called during the hurricane had found no violation and had admonished her for wasting emergency resources. The neighbors she had expected to support her enforcement actions had instead rallied to my defense. And when her own basement had flooded, she had been forced to accept help from the very person she had spent months trying to punish. The story had a clear moral, which George never tired of repeating. Do not let your pride and need for control prevent you from seeing reason, because reality has a way of humbling even the most determined tyrant. And when that humbling comes, you will hope that the people you wronged are bigger than you were, generous enough to help despite your past behavior. I had been that bigger person, not because I was particularly noble or forgiving, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, I had gained something far more valuable than petty revenge: the respect of my community, genuine friendships with my neighbors, and the satisfaction of knowing I had acted with integrity throughout a difficult situation. The generator continued its steady hum outside, a mechanical heartbeat keeping my home warm and dry through the winter storm. It was just a machine, a backup power system that had functioned exactly as designed. But it had become a symbol of something larger, of preparedness over complacency, of helping others over enforcing rules, of community over control. As the night deepened and the ice storm intensified, I thought about how different my life in Meadowbrook Heights had become since that first confrontation with Patricia over the generator installation. I had expected years of ongoing conflict with an unreasonable HOA. Instead, I had ended up with a reformed association, supportive neighbors, and even a grudging acknowledgement from my former adversary. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes, I reflected. You prepare for one kind of storm and end up weathering an entirely different kind. But if you stand your ground, help others when you can, and refuse to let bullies dictate your actions, you can emerge from the chaos stronger and more connected than before. The power stayed out until morning, when utility crews finally cleared the ice from the lines and restored service. My generator shut off automatically, having once again performed its job flawlessly. I made coffee, grateful for hot water and electricity, and started my day knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was prepared to face them. That preparedness, both practical and emotional, was the lasting gift of my conflict with Patricia and the hurricane that had brought everything to a head. I had learned that you cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how you respond. You cannot prevent storms, natural or human, but you can prepare for them and help others weather them as well. And sometimes, the best revenge against someone who tried to make your life miserable is simply to be a better person than they were, to help when they would have hindered, to unite when they would have divided, and to lead by example when they tried to lead by intimidation. My story in Meadowbrook Heights was far from over, but the chapter involving Patricia and the hurricane had reached its conclusion. It was a conclusion marked not by dramatic confrontation or legal battles, but by quiet resolution and community healing. The HOA that had once been a source of stress and conflict was now a functional organization serving its intended purpose. The neighbors who had been strangers or mere acquaintances had become friends and allies, and me. I was just Franklin Yates, electrical engineer and homeowner, living in a subdivision in Pine Valley, New Jersey, with a generator behind my house, and the knowledge that I had weathered the storm, both literal and figurative, with my principles intact. The generator stood ready for the next emergency, whenever it might come, and so did I.